Hey fam, so one of the things that I continue to get asked is what is my methodology for choosing specific players for specific lineups for a specific game week? And unfortunately, life's been hectic, so I haven't had the time to fully deep dive like I want to. But the silver lining in all of that is that because I haven't had time, I've had to really depend on things that I know from past testing works in terms of underlying metrics, what to go for, and basically go to those things and focus on those things that I know should have the most impact in terms of predictive value. And unfortunately, go through them really quickly and hope that I'm able to submit some of my lineups. Things that I'll be going through today are all available in what I innovatively named SorareMLB document. So anything that I'll be showing today are available there, with the exception of maybe a few things like this particular page is only on the Sorare FP document, although I do share it on Twitter if and when I'm able to go on there. The underlying metrics that I was talking about, in terms of the underlying metrics that I trust or metrics that matter that I was referring to earlier, are tests that I've done in the past to see if certain metrics have more predictive value. So, what I do is hone in on some of these specific metrics because we want to always focus on skills over stats. So, what does that mean? Well, taking for example XFIP, since we're on this tab, for pitchers, XFIP is a sticky metric or quote unquote sticky metric, meaning that let's say for the 2023 season, the ending xFIP for a pitcher was high, so it's bad. Well, it's very likely that next season it'll continue to be bad. But if the box score or the stats, the let's say Sawyer MLB points, are really high for that pitcher, but his xFIP is low, well, I'm selling high. And as a side note, the xFIP, unsurprisingly and as expected, it's one of the higher metrics on my list to look for in terms of pitchers. All right, well, now that we're done with one of probably many tangents, let's get into an extremely high level overview of what I do. So, this column over here called bat rating is something that you might actually see on some of the documents or dashboards. And I don't highlight it because it's actually made for myself. And it's basically an algorithm that I created for me so that I could scout and do lineup decisions, right? Matchup decisions. And I just, as mentioned, I don't have much time, so I need a quick number that is as en- as all encompassing as possible, and that's what this represents. It just so happened to, after all of the tests from last season, it just happens to be very highly correlated, or it has a lot of predictive value in terms of picking the right player for the next game week. So thankfully, it just so happened to work out so that it did do that. It is one number that I can use for both scouting and for matchup decisions. Whether or not that remains, I don't know. But what I do know is that we'll continue to test it to make sure that the algorithm is always capturing exactly what it's intended to capture. So anyway, that's what this column is for. And this next column here, it's a plethora of different things. So that may that be different weighing of all the going back to this thing of many of the different metrics, what I project for these players to have in terms of plate appearances, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, it's a bunch of different things. And so the first thing I do is I sort it by that. And after that sort, then I get a first glimpse of who I might want to start digging more into for that game week. And real quick on some of these color coding, these players here highlighted in gray and bluish font. These are players that I will almost always not bench because there's something in their makeup or underlying metrics that I fully believe in that if I'm to be consistent with my whole looking at things from a data perspective, I need to just trust the underlying metrics, not regardless, but trust the underlying metrics enough to know to at least dig into a specific matchup. If let's say so Randy or actually Yandy Diaz for this game week is not projecting well, but his bat rating is so high, I mean, so for this game week, I'm going to need a really good reason to bench Yandy based off of his bat rating, even though his matchup might not be particularly well. So this also takes into account pitchers that they might be facing, or Randy even. I'm going to need a really, 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 really good reason to bench him because he's so elite in terms of what I call bat rating, right? And I'm supposed to be able to rely on this number. So after I have a list of these core names, then I'll start maybe digging more into some of their specific matchups. And as a major caveat, I normally, or at least in the past, I never ever looked at the whole left-handed bat versus right-handed pitching, that kind of thing, and definitely not bat versus a specific pitcher. And now on to the caveat. The caveat now, though, is that we now have data that wasn't available last year. And this specific data that I'm talking about is the pitching models Stuff Plus and Bot. And again, this is in the data set that's shared on the Google Drive. So we're now able to see, even down to the pitches, how well a pitcher is doing, regardless of what the box score says. And I have to credit Clamp and our guy Miguel for changing my mind in terms of I guess, the importance of some of these metrics. So, one of the first things that I would then do is, again, this is in the shared drive. And by the way, I update these things constantly. I just don't post it on Discord or Twitter. So, you'll just have to go into it and look at the timestamp and see if it's been updated from the last time you looked at it. So, I first look at the overall aggregate of that game week. Oh, wait a minute. I was in the wrong game week. All right. First, I go to the proper game week, and then I go to the aggregate of all of the pitchers for that game week. So Texas, let's take for example, or Philly and Texas, I can see that the average of their opposing pitchers' metrics are pretty low. So it's something to target. But what these numbers represent are the averages. So taking Toronto here, it's the averages of these pitchers, and we never want to take go off of an average, especially an average of an average, right? So what I'll then do is I'll say, okay, Texas and Philly, let me take a look at that. Well, first of all, do I have players from Philly and Texas? And if I don't, should I maybe consider getting the players, especially if they've been on my target list anyway? All right, well, let's go down to Philly. And yes, I do have some Philly players. Some of them I sold because I'm a moron. And I see here that first of all, they're at Colorado. Immediately that, hey, you should probably target that. But going a little bit deeper, I see that there are two left-handed bats. I'm sorry, left-handed pitchers. One of the first things I think to myself is, self, do I have right-handed bats that could take advantage of this juicy matchup? And keeping in mind that this sheet was shared over a week ago, I've been targeting Trey Turner, Alec Bohm, and Real Muto because they were already on my watch list. And seeing that, so let's go to game week 14, also shared. Seeing that game week 14, again, there's a weak left handed pitcher and another left handed pitcher that, well, seems to be doing pretty well, but Alex Wood can be hit or miss sometimes. So knowing that, going back to game week 13, knowing that, I started targeting Trey Turner pretty heavily because of these two specific game weeks. And if he is part of a lineup that maybe wins me something that's a quarter of what I paid for him, then in my opinion, it's worth it, especially from a Sorare MLB perspective where we look long term, right? And not like years I'm talking about, although that's also true, but going to the strength of schedule where, so this area here, this is the opposing XFIP of a team for the next handful of game weeks or the middle of the season before the last month of our Sorare MLB game. And based off of that, Philly had a tough stretch if I was to add in some of the prior game weeks here. But they have a winnable schedule. Now 57% is not high, right? But that offense, once it starts to click, that's a lot of potential opportunities for plate appearances. So based off of that, I started targeting Trey, Bohm, and Real Muto heavily. And as of a few hours ago, I actually got two Trey Turners. One of them was accidental. And I was only able to do that because I was able to sell Masa Yoshida from one of the game weeks using the same methodology. So going back to our lineup page, what I did was I put in Trey Turner's name, did all the calculations, and here he is, unsurprisingly, one of the top ones. And then here's Real Muto and Bohm as well. Then back to our pitcher matchup grid. So Philly, Texas. I don't have any Texas. I know that. So that's something I don't have to look at. And Washington, I do have some, but I don't play them. And to my demise, actually. So next, we're looking at Chicago. This pitcher is missing because he doesn't have enough data. So it's a coin toss on whether or not we want to believe his draft pedigree or what he's done in the minor leagues. I tend to never start new pitchers coming up. So based off of that, I target them from a batter hitter perspective. Fortunately, I don't have left-handed bats from Chicago. I targeted Benintendi last week because he should have. Fortunately, it didn't pan out. Should have been able to take advantage of that matchup last week and then take advantage of this week, but that plan failed, and it's okay. And then looking at Seattle, I see that just like Philly, they have two left-handers that are not very strong. So, like Philly, this should be, in my head anyway, this should be something that I target, especially since most people will have that Philly stack in a lot of their priority lineups. And if for whatever reason, right, game theory, if that stack fails and this stack goes off, then high probability that I'll be up there in terms of rewards, right? It's just game theory. Especially since the right-hand bat of Seattle has underperformed based off of their expected, right? So Julio, I don't have Julio, but like Julio, France, Eugenio Suarez, and even Kellenic, who's been doing okay against weak left-handed pitchers. So I know that that's probably something I should look into. So I go down and look at my matchups sheet and I look for the players that I just mentioned. And oh, Haniger, he's in San Francisco now. And there goes Gio, there goes Kellenic, and France. So what I like to do just for my visual cue is I mark those off and move on. Actually, I have Vaughn, but I didn't like his matchup, so I don't know, go put him in the lowers. And I have his rare, but I don't, I didn't like his matchup. So next, I look for some of these players. Actually, we said Castellanos is good, right? Put him in our priority lineup of super rare. Next is Goldie, so let's look at their matchup. And I see that they're facing another unknown. It's a left-hander. As mentioned previously, I don't mind targeting those. It is a hit or miss, though. And the way things have been going for the Redbirds, they'll probably get owned. But it's a left-handed unknown and potentially a very ownable matchup alongside another left-handed same thing. And the one right-handed pitcher, I unfortunately know because I have him, is not the best. Or at least it's very ownable, right? So go back here and put in a priority lineup. Actually, all of these are priority. I don't actually have a priority sequence at the moment, but he's one of my supposed to be one of my best cards, and I get to use him here for now. So I'll continue to look for right-handed bats from the Cardinals, and oh, here's one. And Wilson is one of my higher rated rares, so I put him into the super rare, and then look for more right-hand bats. There you go. Dylan is a I can't go there. Dylan is a switch hitter, and he's currently better on the right side. And then Tommy, he can potentially get benched for one of the games because they no comment, making mistakes, but they'll put in DeYoung because he's a right-hand bat. So I don't want to risk Tommy being benched, even though I completely disagree with it. And then let's pair him up here. So I know I have two limited Contreras. And next on the docket, we are to look at Baltimore, Boston, and Mets. Before I do that, we already decided that Trey would be in. And let's pair Bohm up here. So this will be my right-handed, and I'm just breaking them up. I don't feel comfortable just doing this. Putting in Stott, he's a left-handed bat, but whatever. Oh, and I also see Yelich and Contreras, so Milwaukee, so let's look at those. On the pitcher matchup list, so here's Milwaukee, and looks like Contreras might have a good first game, and he's a catcher, and hopefully he gets a DH day next day and catch on the third day, and at least it's a weak right-hander, so thinking game theory differential versus the Philly stack, the question I ask myself is, can Yelich and Rowdy Tellez and Adames, who I don't have, but can these left-hand bats take advantage of this? So Adames, can he take advantage of this? The left-hand bats of Winker, Yelich, Tellez, can they take advantage of this? I'd say, I don't know, maybe. I'm not as comfortable because it's not as clear cut as having two left-handeds or two very weak right-handed pitchers like, let's see out here. Like, okay, the Angels left-handed bats or bat, it's really just Shohei. He can own this. Or, I hate to admit this, but even Oakland can probably take advantage of Texas, which pains me because it's Heaney, and I have him. And of course, Texas can probably take advantage of these two left-handed pitchers. So Milwaukee is so-so, and Boston. Okay, so again, we have a pitcher that doesn't have enough data. Well, this is Adam Wainwright. He's getting back from injury. He usually gets up for these games, and I'm a Cardinals fan, so I don't want to target Boston. I know that that's bad method, meaning I am purposefully not putting in my Boston people, even though I know they could probably do well because it's my home team. I know that that's bad. But a big part of this is enjoyment, right? Like, I don't want SorareMLB to hinder my enjoyment of the game itself. So I'll purposefully take an L on this, even though I know that this game they could probably do pretty well in. And in terms of St. Louis pitching, their numbers, I mean, it's still pretty low here, but their numbers were so bad recently, and I refused to put in players, even though these numbers were significantly lower the past few game weeks. I took a major L on it. Actually, it was a double whammy because I lost both on Sorare and in real life. But anyway, the next matchup I think was the Mets, and I have Nimmo and McNeil, and I've been targeting Lindor and Alonso in part because next game week 14, the Mets, first of all, has a 4 game week, but they also face two very weak left-handed pitchers. But I couldn't get, or at least as of this recording, I don't have Lindor yet or Polar Bear, Pete Alonso. So the question I ask myself is, can McNeil and Nimmo take advantage? Can either of them? And I think Nimmo can because he's been pretty good versus left-handed pitching, even though he's a left-handed bat. So yes on this and yes on that. So immediately I think to myself, okay, let's put him in a more prioritized lineup and McNeil in a lower one. So going back to our matchup sheet, let's put them, I don't know, let's stack them. And usually this should not happen because the way Mets do their lineups, they don't normally have these two players close to each other. But recently, with the Mets struggling, they've had McNeil higher in the lineup. Which, by the way, I just thought about it, but I should probably be targeting Marte as well because he's a right-hand bat and he's struggling, and his prices will probably be depressed. But I don't have a much of a long-term thing sight for him as I do, let's say, Lindor's. And going back to our strength of schedule, where's the Mets? Here's the Mets. They can take advantage of some of their game week matchups until probably around week 18, and then it gets pretty tough for them after that. So if I was a trader seller type, I'd probably target them heavily, take advantage of the game week, and then sell. But again, I want Lindor long term, so I don't mind even if their future matchups are very tough, especially since I already have two of their main Mets. So going back to this sheet, I think I mentioned that I wanted Nimmo more than McNeil in the lineup, so I don't know. I don't think I'll pair them up. So I'll just go with this stack and then leave Nimmo out on his own. Baltimore. Going back to our pitcher page, not favorites, but I have a lot of his cards, Ovi, and I have to use him this week, so I just have to kind of hope that he doesn't do too bad. But looking at these two matchups here, I would think that the left-hand bats of Baltimore will do extremely well against these two relatively very young pitchers. And in this case, I want to look at the park. So I go to the matchups grid. That one's for pitchers. So I go to the matchup grid and scroll all the way to Baltimore to see if the park is conducive to hitting extra bases, and it looks like that's already been deleted. That's what that looks like. So I'll turn and look at my own sheet real quick. And yeah, they're in Baltimore. Oh, duh. Which is not smart of me because they're in Baltimore here as well. And now that I think about it, even Pittsburgh is a batter hitter friendly park. So that tells me that I should probably prioritize these. And Adley is a middle infielder, so I need him for a lineup that'll probably not have a rare middle infielder. So that's unfortunate that I have to break up that stack. So let's get Mullins up there and Rafi. And while we're at it, might as well put in Tucker. And because I put in Tucker, let's put in Bregman as well. Well, on that note, since we put Rafi in that lineup, I see that Turner is rating high, so let's go ahead and stack him. And I think we also said that Yelich and Contreras might be a play. And actually, speaking of Turner and another Bostonian, or not Bostonian, but he plays for Boston and is currently rating highly, both from a bat rating and our matchup algorithm, then go ahead and pair him up with Turner. And I noticed that I didn't go through Houston, so let's look at that. Back to our pitching grid, and Houston facing Kopech and Cease, who, depending on his command that day, can have a terrible day. This is how I actually got to win my first super rare because I figured that the left-hand bats of the Royals had a chance. So, because of that, I'm pretty comfortable with Kyle being in one of our priority lineups. And it's not ideal that I'm breaking up his rare with the Bregman rare, but I don't have rares in this quadrant for the ALs. And this is about the time when I stop looking at all of the metrics and just look at this whole page here to kind of gauge and move things around, keying in on some of the priority matchups and the differentials. What was it? It was Seattle right-hand bats and St. Louis right-hand bats. And I wish I had Arenado, especially since he's been in a slump, but I haven't gotten a chance to apparently make the right offer, as I did with Trey Turner, because well, looks like a lot of people are down on him. So because Tyler O'Neill is hurt, my only right-hand bat aside Wilson Contreras, that's rare, is Dylan Carlson, who does well on the right-hand side. He's a switch hitter. And hopefully when, not if, all of the right-hand bats of St. Louis does well, especially Wilson and Goldie, and I know Arenado's going to do it. And by the way, no numbers to back that up because his expected stats are actually pretty low. But the way he works and the things that he does, it's just not going to last. Anyway, so I rearrange things so that I try my best to mix and match while making sure that around this quadrant here, if I have their card, I try not to bench them unless I have a really good reason. And up here in these quadrants, if I see any names like, let's say, Randy or Yandy, so going back to their matchup, I have to have a really good reason for me to bench them. I'm not going to bench Randy because he's going up against New York, and he's just one of those players that produces when he's in the limelight. So even though the matchup grid says be careful, I'm playing him because Garrett Cole is not going to be there the whole game, and it takes one pitch. And going back to his bat rating, it it's elite. So even though he's not in this lower quadrant, I'm going to find a way to put him in a lineup because he will take advantage of that one pitch, that one mistake. Unlike, so let's take a look at one of my priority people, a right-hand bat. In this case, Dylan Carlson of the St. Louis Cardinals. His bat rating is low. I should not want to play him unless the matchups are that good, which it's not that good, but he's the best that I have in terms of taking advantage of going back to the pitcher grid, taking advantage of these two potentially weak pitchers in a game week that that I need to hope that my differential is a difference because those winning lineups, I'm pretty sure, is going to be made up mainly with Philly, Texas, that stack, those stacks I meant. So going back to our matchup grid, this is why I'm kind of scared starting Dylan Carlson, but I don't have another right-hand bat except for Wilson Contreras. So hopefully it pays off. And in terms of picking a pitcher, I like to look at the team's WRC for that year, or for some of us who like WRC plus, I take a look at that and target the weaker ones. And if we were to look down here, no surprise that Tampa Bay is the highest. But an easier view is looking at the pitcher specific matchup grid. This is also a tool that I use to look at the probables, like some of the beatable matchups in the future, right? So what is this, Cincinnati? So I have Lodolo and Green. So I just match up wherever they are slotted, and looking at these, this allows me to see ahead of time and plan ahead of time if whether or not I should keep a pitcher or target them. And the reason I like this view is because it shows the park factor, right? So if I have Milwaukee pitchers, this might be a park that I target. Oh, St. Louis. And this column here, this shows their strikeout rating, right? So St. Louis, yeah, right now they currently strike out a lot. It's a pitcher-friendly park, and the only thing giving me hesitation is their WRC plus. But as in the case of, let's say, an Atlanta, Atlanta strikes out a lot. So even though their offense is so potent, if you have a strikeout rate type pitcher going up against his own team, I would absolutely play Strider because he'll make him swing and strike out. So that's how I choose pitchers, and this is how I lay out my batters. And those are some of the thought processes that I go through when I'm setting my lineups, and hopefully it's not last minute like actually right now. And again, going back to these views here, this is all on that shared drive, and it's the very same thing that I use. And if anyone sees something that they would like to have, but it's not currently built in there, just let me know and I'll see if we can make that happen to hopefully help you in your journey to play and enjoy this Sorare MLB game or fantasy baseball in general. Thanks, fam. Good luck. And this is where we're at after we basically import everything that we typed into the spreadsheet, which, by the way, hopefully someday soon somebody can invent some kind of an app to import all of our favorite projections and or our completed lineups from Excel to the native site. Anyway, I've never had this much time before. I usually have 3.5 minutes or so, and I jet through everything and hope that things go well. Wow, 34. Never had that before. So, being that this is new, what I would have liked to have done in the past is quickly look at all of the lineups. That I'm sure everybody does this, but looking at, okay, well, this is my 3 and 2 stack, and just kind of double checking to make sure that I did not miss anything. Now, again, this particular week, it's not that great unless you have Philly right-handed bats or Philly in general. But that's why we pivoted, and that's why we chose the teams that we chose.